time zones. But thank you. Welcome, Sahara Defensor. Thank you for joining us today during our meeting. And we're lucky to have you today. Sahara Defensor served as a member of the new class of Rotaractors who rechartered the then defunct organization in 2008. As president of the Rotaract Club of the Marianas, she spearheaded the organization's first international service project, donating Tagalog English dictionaries to 3 schools in each of the regions of the Philippines. This endeavor fostered sister club relationships with various Rotaract clubs throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Sahara left Guam to finally pursue her legal studies after serving as a policy analyst for numerous senators in the Guam legislature and then as staff assistant at Atty. As an attorney based in Boston, Massachusetts, Sahara cultivated her profession in administrative law, commercial litigation, and personal injury. She had also traveled to over 36 states across the nation representing veterans and individuals with disabilities who had been denied medical benefits. Today, Sahara serves as the legislative director of the Office of Delegate Michael St. Nicholas in Washington, D.C., where she develops and manages Guam's policies in the federal sphere. It's an honor and pleasure to have you with us, Sahara. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hafa. Good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to kind of be back in the Rotary sphere and see some very familiar faces that I've definitely missed the last 8-9 years that I've been away from Guam. This I guess presentation is gonna come at like I don't know, maybe all over the place. I had not thought or expected that I was going to give the speech. I actually thought it was going to be somebody else. But so I just have a few things to, I guess, kind of talk about. And I believe this is a great opportunity to kind of show how some of the experiences that I've had with Rotaract and Rotary kind of like just followed me to where I am today. And so, you know, as we are all familiar with, before every Rotary Club function, the 4-way test is something that is never amiss, right? It's recited before every meeting, printed in weekly newsletters, adorned on banners raised in function rooms. It's not simply just the standard that Rotarians measure conduct and relationships. It's this desire and sort of optimism that we hope the world just revolves around. Fun facts about me: as a child, my mother would tell me about this 4-way test. I never knew it was called the 4-way test. She would just start reciting things and then tells me that, you know, subconsciously it was like a foundation for her life and how she like moved through life. And I only came to realize that later it was because she was a recipient of like several Rotary scholarships and programs in her youth when she was in the Philippines. When I joined Rotaract, she was pretty proud that I was chosen to be part of an organization and asked to be part of an organization that had such a positive impact on her life. I think she really saw my joining as kind of her contribution back into the organization, a kind of continuation of, you know, the turning wheel of the Rotary, if you will. You know, although we had our first official rechartering of the Rotaract Club of the Marianas at the University of Guam School of Business and Public Administration, and thank you, Dr. Nita, you were dean at the time and you allowed us to use the room. A lot of our activities and our organizational planning really did take place in Tumon Bay. So this is a story of like from Tumon Bay to Washington, D.C. You know, working with like-minded colleagues who've become lifelong friends, we set to take the 4 Guam Rotary Club's baby at that time to new heights. And working with friends who displayed common interests and values, it was really not that difficult to achieve whatever goals that we set. So engaging in activities with truth and fairness, building goodwill and friendships, and ensuring that it was beneficial to all concerned was incredibly easy. However, applying that in a setting outside of Rotary was really a whole different story. As you know, well, as many of you may know, I spent a significant amount of time at the Guam legislature. Now I don't get Now, I won't get too much into the intricacies of the Guam legislature because I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about the shenanigans you hear on social media and the local newspapers, but working for both Republicans and Democrats, I found that there really were not a whole lot of differences between each of these individual senators. They all wanted what was best for the people of Guam. They wanted a balanced budget. They wanted to ensure economic stability. They wanted to make sure children, get a good education, our communities were safe, and every individual who found themselves sick received adequate medical attention. And that was the truth. And it was also fair to all concerned. But the differences in their team banner, whether it was an R or a D, oftentimes prevented even the better of friendships and building of goodwill to achieve the outcome that they were all looking for. And so I've realized that the idea of truth and whose definition of truth really perplexed me quite a bit. So when the question of fairness would pop up, it was quite astonishing to observe the level of exclusion that would occur just so that the idea of fairness to all concerned only included individuals that were, at the end contemplated to benefit from the goal. And so these were a lot of frustrating times at the Guam legislature and in local Guam politics. Then I served some time at Atty and my time at the governor's office pretty much prematurely ended at the first question: is it the truth? I won't go into details, you can just Google it. But now up until that point, I had carefully engaged in conduct that would ultimately build goodwill, better friendships. But what does one do when these friendships and relationships you have built on the background of truth and fairness uses their version of truth to where the outcome of the situation is no longer fair and beneficial to all concerned? That was my experience, being in Rotary, being in Rotaract, and applying that kind of like in real world settings. And when it kind of turns on you, it defeats you, it makes you question and doubt everything that you've come to, you've done to be truthful or understand to be truthful and to be fair, and what integrity means. It's easy to give up hope and spiral into depression, but then you have amazing people, angels really, who encourage you to, encourage me mainly to move on, because success is always the ultimate retribution, and that the four-way test is not always common, I guess, just like common sense. So then I moved away to Boston for law school and had pretty much an incredible experience. I was asked to kind of touch upon diversity, inclusion, and equity in today's society. Now, I'm from Guam, I grew up in Agate. I went to Southern High School. I went to the University of Guam. And the idea of diversity inclusion was just really never something that I contemplated until I experienced questions about the scholarships I received when I was in school. And from there, it just kind of like snowballed into a bunch of other eye-opening experiences. So when I was in law school, I joined a group of women to form what is called the Women of Color Law Students Association. And this stems because the conversations that we felt were important were being excluded. And these were conversations about, how do I address injustices in real life situations, from Trayvon Martin to sentencing inequities, between white women and women of color, and even to the idea that while women do make 80 cents to the dollar to a man's dollar, women of color actually make incredibly less. Some of these experiences that I have found really formulated how I, began to kind of like move through my life, and especially my professional life. I found that decisions that I had made going forward in school and in legal dispositions, and even in the comments I make on social media, of whatever topic is of the day and what I support or am against, were very much in mind with the perspectives that I have come to learn and understand from the different diverse perspectives that I was attaining from others and other stories. So, you know, I learned that you didn't necessarily have to experience something in order to advocate for that particular injustice that you had seen. Opening the door to allow for other perspectives and experiences really allow for decisions that truly benefit all concerned. So when I became an attorney, a managing partner had asked me to take on some, cases outside of what I was comfortable with, and those were like veterans disability and social security appeals. And crazy enough, this allowed me to travel to middle of nowhere, Alabama, the outskirts of Missouri, and it really helped me understand that a diversity of ideas was also not just the inclusion of others with different skin colors, but it was an understanding and inclusion of the diversity of backgrounds and perspectives that really in all respect helped me win appeals for clients who initially lost their cases because the judge really didn't understand what, Mr. John Smith's conditions as he lived in like Albany, Georgia, and nobody knows where that is, and what life is like in Albany, Georgia. I then made a very difficult decision to leave beautiful New England. I love the fall. So leaving the area, great jobs with a lot of perks and bonuses that I miss. And even an amazing community of like Guam kids that live and work in Boston just to trek up the steps of Capitol Hill. So I left the good and very comfortable scene to do something I think even grander. While the pull of wanting to go back and do great work for the people of Guam was ultimately my biggest motivation, I found that the often like glitz and glam of Washington, D.C. really was not the case. While it is not as swampy as you probably have heard or imagined what Washington, D.C. is, there are really so many individuals with such moving conviction to bring fairness and justice to those who serve, and that I do see kind of like apply the four-way test. So on the very first day, we were in office with not knowing what to do, how to do it, where to go to do it. Guam introduced its very first bill, which would bring equity to Americans residing in Guam in the form of the Supplemental Security Income, which is a social security program that provides monthly income to individuals who are unable to engage in substantial gainful activity due to a disability. Now, all territories except the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands are excluded from this program. So, great bill, right? We have a lot of it's a great bill to like move forward with, because one, the truth is there are thousands of disabled Americans and hundreds in Guam who have been left out of this program. Correcting this injustice would surely bring fairness to all Americans, no matter where they reside. And Americans in these left out territories would feel more American, which builds goodwill across the country. And it is very much so beneficial to all concerned. So then, like, what's the problem? Why hasn't it been passed? We have rules and politics, something called PAYGO and Puerto Rico. PAYGO is this house rule that if something costs $100, we have to find $100 from somewhere and taking it out. And, if there's no new revenue coming in order to pay for this new program or this new spend. And the insular territories, which comprises of Guam, Sinai, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, have always had to compete with the interests of Puerto Rico. While it would cost a drop in the bucket of the federal government to fund a Guam SSI program, the overwhelming costs to Puerto Rico almost always overshadow the minute needs that our island and other insular territories really need. So it's always a matter of like competing interests, and unfortunately it becomes a matter of advocating why the people of Guam is more important than, say, the 4th District of Mississippi. So, but we don't let that kind of hold us back or not motivate us to move forward and do what we need to do. So this past term, we had introduced many bills and advocated for various amendments that would be beneficial to the people of Guam. However, with a Republican-led Senate, Republican White House, and a very, very contentious and divided nation, what was once easy is really no longer the case. And then, as we all know, COVID happened, and for more than 6 months, everyone in DC was just focused primarily on the health and economy of the nation. There have been zero opportunities for anything else non-COVID related. What we did achieve, however, in this kind of like zero opportunity zone outside of COVID, related bills, is a ridiculous amount of federal monies to the island of Guam in a short period of time that we likely would really not have seen, but for the advocacy of the Guam office in coordination with the other territorial office. The most integral part of my job and what I spend almost a good number of a good percentage of the day doing is reviewing bills and ensuring that Guam and even the other territories are included. What we have found is that Guam, outside of DC and Puerto Rico, is really often left out in like drafting legislation. And this is not because the drafters decide to leave out Guam or they choose to, it's just they forget that Guam is part of the United States. So you would find that in some bills, the definition of states include Guam, and then other times it doesn't. So we would have to call them out on it and be like, oh, we forgot. Or sometimes amendments, language to amend a program that is existing today would have a consideration of like including Guam, but because they fail to redefine it in another provision or an existing provision, it often becomes problematic. And then again, Guam gets left out. So this is an experience that we have been kind of like struggling with in this kind of like journey. And one example would be, negotiations in the CARES Act. As you know, one of the biggest provisions in the CARES Act that Guam truly benefited from was like unemployment. And again, taking kind of like the 4-way test, the one question that kind of like comes to mind that actually falls against Guam is the issue of fairness on the unemployment, right? While Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands already have their own unemployment programs, their unemployment programs were only supplemented by the federal government and federal funding. Whereas Guam's unemployment program for COVID-related unemployment issues really are fully funded by the federal government. So I guess there comes a situation where maybe even one of the questions in the 4-way test is the answer is no, but it still benefits. And that also still perplexes me sometimes. And then there's the issues of like economic impact payments, which as most people know is the stimulus check. A lot of those funds do come from the federal government, and they are paid for by the federal government with zero contribution by the local government. The fairness as well that we have found as much as we try to negotiate things has to do, for example, with like the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. As some of those in that industry understands, the CARES Act provided a huge amount of supplemental funding for colleges and universities across the nation. However, historically, Black colleges and universities and even Hispanic serving institutions received more money per student than, the University of Guam and other Asian Pacific Native American institutions. And so in a way, when we try to bring equity to these kinds of situations, and those people in power understand that we need to bring equity to these situations and these conditions, because they understand that we need fairness and it would be beneficial to all. It's not a priority for them to move things along. So now we're in this situation of like, all right, here's the four-way test. It should make sense. If it makes sense and the answer is yes to everything, why are we kind of like still stuck in maybe a conundrum of trying to figure out where we go from here? As I explained earlier, things don't necessarily happen in a vacuum. It's not just necessarily the House applying certain things outside of the sphere of Rotary and Rotaract really is not as simple. I am hopeful, and not just because I work for a Democrat, but I am hopeful that the incoming Biden administration, I also looked at the legal arguments that have been coming up. I do not believe this is going up to the Supreme Court, or if it does, it's going to get kicked out and we will still have a Biden-Harris administration come January 20th. But so we are pretty hopeful that with this Biden administration, that we'll be able to kind of like cast the larger Talaja net and catch for Guam, even if the Republicans maintain a majority in the Senate, because of the idea that we have a better sense of understanding, and we understand that there's going to be a whole lot of diversity in that administration. So plans for like economic stability through, reimbursements of like the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, inclusion of like inclusion of Guam and free trade agreements are just some of the priorities that we hope to continue, not just for Guam, but, really for the rest of the nation. So in all my kind of like babbling of what I've gone through since I've left Guam and left Rotary, I think given my experiences, the four-way test is not necessarily just the end-all be-all. It's also this like foundation in the core that we kind of like must build upon. There are quite a lot of competing interests and different perspectives and priorities and even different truths for that matter. But I hold it very high in regard and appreciate the genuineness that it brings to really any problem solving that we kind of like must address and must face. So I will kind of stop there. I'm happy to take any questions. I hope they're easy questions. I did ask James to ask me an easy question. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful way to provide just a whole history of what has happened since past President Sahara has left the island. And I love how you voted in the four-way test and how that had been something that your mom especially was already aware of. And so what a beautiful tie in to your journey as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and open it up. Do we have, I know that past President Dr. Annette has to leave. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
I just wanted to say thank you, Attorney Sahara Defensor, for spending time with us and just giving us some insight of what a University of Guam Trident alumna can do. I guess my question is, if there is an anticipation of what the future expectations for Guam might be, what would that look like? We're hearing things in the news about statehood and then just the interest in grants and more funding, and then the compact impact. So there's a lot on our plate, a lot on the horizon. So if you could prioritize the future and some of the expectations, what might be the top 3 things we could look forward to from your perspective?
Sure. Hi, good morning, Dr. Santos. It's really nice to hear from you. Definitely from my perspective, and again, we mentioned who I work for, so this is my perspective. This is not any indication of what my boss may or may not or think, whether he agrees with me or not. I think the issue of decolonization is important, and it should come up. It should be not necessarily decolonization for Guam, but the issue of self-determination. And that really is important, because if the people of Guam are not able to decide definitively what kind of relationship they want to have with the United States, whether it be independent or whether it be statehood, or even if it is status quo, we can't necessarily move forward. The idea that we are having, even with grants, even with programs for economic solutions, economic diversity and progress, do kind of fall back to the issue of, well, where do we want to go, and where do we want to go kind of forward with our relationship? I know there have been discussions of like maybe a free association with the United States. However, you need to have some sort of independence before that status is achieved. And so when we do think about, again, grants and economic, diversity programs and growth programs for Guam and even for the region, there is a faction of individuals in Guam who really don't want to move forward on some of these topics, because to them it feels as if we're just kind of like sinking down into this like I know, like kind of like white savior mentality and movement, right? It's like, if we keep getting money and if we keep getting grants from the federal government, we're going to be forever indebted to them. So I think, on my perspective, the issue of self-determination needs to really be at the very forefront before we make any decisions, before Guam makes any decisions as far as like where we need to go from there. So that's kind of where I see it. But as far as like status quo, and if we remain in status quo, there are rumblings of a lot of opportunity for more programs and for more grants across the country in this upcoming administration. However, what we need to ensure of is opening the economy, and we can't open the economy if people are still sick, if people are still dying, if our hospitals are still are like over capacity with COVID issues. So while the horizon looks really beautiful, and we can see that far, and it seems like we're getting closer day by day, the priorities for this upcoming administration in the White House and even in Congress is going to be COVID. How do we manage COVID just so that we can kind of like get back into the real world, as much as that is, and unfortunately that's the reality of the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a loaded question. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
For easy questions, but it's okay. Dr. Santos is happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry, I'm on my way back to Baltimore. I'm actually right down the road from you.
Awesome.
Here in Alexandria. So the way I've always seen Guam right now, with the way it is and the status, is it's kind of like it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We're part of the U.S., but we don't have to do a lot of things that the states do, like, for example, pay federal tax. So in your opinion, do you see, because I think ultimately that decision, whether we're going to go statehood or, the whole decolonization, that has to go to the people. In my opinion, it should go to the people for a vote. From that vote, then then they can take it forward to Congress. But in that whole idea of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out with the federal government, how do you see that? Do you see that as a benefit or as a hindrance to Guam's progression and growth?
That's also a kind of like another loaded question, also kind of a double-edged sword, right? There are positives and there are negatives to the status quo, and that's some of the issues that we face and in trying to really balance, right? And we take it case by case. So, for example, in our current situation that you had brought up, we don't have to pay federal taxes, or the federal taxes that we do pay because of the Organic Act of federal law kind of reverts that money back to the government of Guam. So, we don't necessarily not pay federal taxes. There are just certain federal taxes, but they all get back to Guam. And then we have a situation where we're currently where we're at, we don't pay federal taxes. And as I mentioned earlier, we just got almost $1 billion in federal unemployment program that Guam doesn't have to pay for, where all the other states actually paid a portion of it or had to contribute into it, right? So it is kind of a struggle to understand, where we're at, and I see why people can be very complacent with where we're at today and the status that we have right now, and not necessarily want to move forward on whether the people of Guam choose to be independent or they choose to remain with the United States, in some sort of capacity. But I agree, the people of Guam need to make that decision. So right now, it's just a matter of like, how do we manage that before Guam's people decides where they want to go and what relationship they want to have. Unfortunately, I don't know. That was such a bad answer, but that's what I have.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I see that past President Dr. McNish, you want to throw in a question?
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Hafaday Rotary Club and Hafaday Sahara. Very good, Sahara. It's very good to see you again. You went to Boston Law, and really, really briefly, do you have any suggestions for young people who might want to go to law school in the near future? Just your biggest surprise coming from Guam, because we don't have a law school on Guam, so we don't have stories circulating on what law school's like. And so do you have like a kind of just like a brief comment that a general suggestion or view? Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. Get experience. Do not go straight to law school. Really get as much experience in the real world as you can. That is my brief statement about it. But at the same, just to kind of expound on that, being in a class of people that have experience and those who came straight from undergrad, there is a huge learning curve for those who just come straight from undergrad. Having experience gives you the perspective to really realistically apply the law. So if you know anybody wanting to go to law school, tell them, take some time off, like take a gap year or two to actually do something. Get in the real world, get your feet wet, really.
Thank you. Great advice. Okay. Our time is up, but did someone have a burning question to ask before we?
I'll ask one question.
Yes. Okay, Russell.
It's not hard. But since thank you everyone thanks for James for sending the link over for me to join this meeting, and Sahara, great job on your presentation, and it's so nice to see everyone. But through the years since I've known Sahara, she's always been kind of that person who's always moving on to the next challenge. So I guess my question to you, kind of getting to the position where you are now, all the experience, your law degree, what's next? What's next for you? What's the next challenge? What's the next hurdle? What's the next big thing on your plate?
I don't know. A lot of the things that I have like actually planned since I was younger really never, like the plans never followed. There was always like a lot of stops and goes and what have you. So whatever next challenge, I just got married last year. I wasn't one who's like, oh, I got married. So I guess that might be I guess this is my next challenge. Sure. But I mean, you know, for especially people who are, you know, for us who are kind of like still young and still like, you know, in there, that is a big consideration, right? With your career, if you choose to have a family and what have you. So I don't know, I would like to think that I'm still young and that there's a lot out there. But you know, there's a lot of opportunities. We have a brand new administration coming in, a lot of plans for the future. There's still a lot of injustices out there that, you know, I'd like to help kind of resolve or, you know, try to start planting seeds so in the next few years they get resolved, because a lot of things don't happen overnight. Yeah, so there's definitely that. But I think for everybody else, it's really not looking for the next challenge. It's also just keeping your eyes and ears and your brain and mind like open to just everything and anything. You know, because you just never know what's out there.